All right, let's dive in. We're going to be talking about some of the most loaded words in all of psychology: psychopath, sociopath, and narcissist. You've heard them everywhere, but we're going to get past the Hollywood hype and figure out what they actually mean. Seriously, just for a second, what's the first image that pops into your head? I'm willing to bet it's some kind of movie villain, right? Someone cold, calculating, and, just plain dangerous. And that image, it's everywhere. The super smart manipulator who feels absolutely nothing, who could be anyone, anywhere. But here's the thing. That pop culture idea barely even scratches the surface of what's really going on from a clinical perspective. It's way more complicated. Okay, so to really get a handle on this, we've got to start by decoding these labels. We need to look at the actual clinical definitions and see where the lines are drawn. So here's the most important thing to get right off the bat. Psychopath and sociopath, they're not actually official diagnoses in the diagnostic manual. They're more like descriptors for traits that fall under one big official umbrella diagnosis: antisocial personality disorder, or ASPD for short. This chart really helps untangle it all. Just look at the origin row. Psychopathy seems to have a stronger link to genetics, maybe even brain structure, while sociopathy can be tied more to someone's environment. And then look at behavior. A psychopath is often more calculated and manipulative, while a sociopath might be more impulsive, more erratic. And then you have narcissistic personality disorder, which is kind of its own thing, driven by this deep need for admiration. So yeah, they are definitely not all the same. But textbook definitions can only tell us so much. To really truly get it, we need to go beyond the clinical jargon and hear from someone who's actually living with one of these diagnoses. That's how an author named Patrick Gaggy puts it. He was diagnosed with sociopathy, and he calls it an emotional learning disability. Think about that for a second. That completely reframes it, right? It's not about being some evil monster. It's about having a fundamental difference in how your brain processes emotions. A real struggle to learn things that most of us just pick up naturally. So here's how Gaji breaks it down. He says he feels what he calls inherent emotions, the factory settings we're all born with, like sadness, joy, surprise. But the social emotions, the ones we learn from watching others, like empathy, guilt, shame, compassion, for him, trying to process those is like trying to read blurry text without glasses. He has to consciously squint and work at it just to figure out what other people seem to get intuitively. And this gets us to a really critical question. Why the destructive behavior? Well, for him, it wasn't about wanting to hurt people. It was actually a kind of prescription to feel something, anything. It was a way to get these jolts of feeling, to escape this constant, crushing pressure of just feeling nothing at all. And this quote just perfectly captures the disconnect. He said that breaking into an empty house, something that would be absolutely terrifying for most of us, for him, it felt like a spa visit. Why? Because the profound silence inside the house finally matched the silence inside his own head, and that brought him a strange kind of calm. Hearing this personal story, it really brings up a much bigger, fascinating question about one of those social emotions in particular, empathy. So Gaji's experience makes it sound like he has this fundamental difficulty learning empathy. But what about other conditions, like narcissism? Well, some recent research suggests that story might be a little different. This is huge. What researchers found is that for some people with narcissistic traits, the issue isn't an inability to feel empathy, it's a lack of motivation to use it. The capacity is there, it's just that the switch is usually off. But if you prompt them to flip it, to really try to see things from someone else's perspective, they actually can. Okay, so we've talked about what's going on inside these different minds. But what does that look like on the outside? Because this lack of empathy, this impulsivity, it has a profound and often devastating ripple effect on the people around them. 99%. Just let that number sink in for a second. According to a 2021 study, a staggering 99% of people in romantic relationships with individuals high in psychopathic traits report being emotionally abused. It's pretty much universal. And the psychological toll on these partners is just immense. We're talking about constant manipulation that creates this incredibly toxic environment. It leads to this whole spectrum of emotional distress: intense anger, deep guilt and shame, paranoia, anxiety, depression. It's a true mental health crisis. But it doesn't just stop in the mind. The body absolutely pays a price too. This kind of prolonged, intense stress can manifest physically in a whole range of serious health problems, from ulcers and headaches to hair loss and even heart palpitations. The body really does keep the score.
So, knowing all this, the internal experience on one side and the external harm on the other, the big question is, where do we go from here? How do we address this in a way that actually helps?
Patrick Gaggy argues that the Hollywood villain stereotype we started with, that's the single biggest barrier to getting anyone help. When we see a condition as just pure evil, it stops people, especially kids, from being identified and getting treatment early on, which is exactly when it's most effective. And with this quote, he just completely flips the script on one of our most common beliefs, the idea that guilt and shame are the only things stopping people from hurting each other. He says, look, I don't feel those things, but my desire to go out and murder someone is zero. And that points to a really fundamental shift. Maybe the real takeaway here isn't about how people feel, but about what they do. It suggests that the path forward isn't trying to magically create feelings that aren't there, but instead developing external behavioral rules for how to be a good person. And that leaves us with this final, really provocative thought. If guilt isn't the only moral compass, what else is there? By focusing on teachable, actionable behaviors instead of feelings, and by normalizing that people experience emotions differently, maybe that's the key. Maybe that's how we can both understand and actually treat these conditions and ultimately prevent a lot of harm.